occurred on a thin stretch of black water in northern Australia. This particular story has inspired two fairly popular horror movies from 2007. They are Blackwater and Rogue. But before we get into today's story, if you enjoy my stories, please subscribe. We upload 1 or 2 times every week. Alright, let's get into today's story. At 11:40 a.m. on December 21st, 2003, 3 young men who were long-time childhood friends hopped in a truck and began travelling south. They were 22-year-old Brett Mann and 19-year-olds Sean Blowers and Ashley McGull. They lived in a coastal city called Darwin, which is actually the capital of the Northern Territory in Australia. The NT, also known as the Top End, is located in the central north of the continent. It is 6 times larger than the UK, but has 280 times less people living in it. Specifically, the UK is home to roughly 70 million people, whereas the Top End is home to only 250,000 people, and half of them live in Darwin. There are many reasons why the Top End is so underpopulated, ranging from politics to poor infrastructure. But the most obvious reason that so few people choose to live in this part of Australia is because it's wildly rugged and dangerous. It is scorching hot year-round, and the weather in general is just unbelievably unpredictable and violent, and as the old saying goes, all the animals there are trying to kill you and each other. But Brett, Sean and Ashley had grown up in Darwin, and so they were accustomed to the hazards of living in the Top End, and so they weren't really concerned about them. What they were concerned with was finding things to do and not getting bored in the city that particular day. In order to ward off boredom, the trio had decided they would head out to a salt flat that was located about 50 miles to the southwest of Darwin. It was this wide open plain that they could just race around on their quad bikes on, and so they loaded these quad bikes into their trailer, attached it to their truck, they hopped in their truck, and at 11:40 a.m. they started heading south out of Darwin. The first eye they were on was this fairly desolate dirt ard that wound around through the wilderness, and it passed by the iconic eucalyptus trees that are very well known in Australia. It passed by palm trees and giant termite mounds, and after driving on this dirt ard for about 30 minutes, the trio passed by the Tumbling Waters Holiday Park, which is a vacation resort for adventurous families. And then, beyond this park, there really was no more civilization. They were headed right into the outback of Australia. And so, this was kind of like the last mark of civilization. And so, the trio, they drive for another 30 minutes past the park, and at some point, all of the trees on either side of the road start getting more and more dense until they begin kind of encroaching over the road, as if it looks like you're driving directly through the heart of a jungle. And they would have recognised this change in scenery as meaning they were nearing the Finnis River, which was off to the right beyond all of the trees. So, they couldn't see it, but they knew they were close, and the Finnis River was not a huge waterway. It was a 30-mile stretch that ran east to west through the Top End, and what it was known for was being very brackish and dark. You could not see into this water more than maybe an inch or two, so it almost appeared black. And so the trio continued, driving along through this kind of jungle atmosphere until the left side of the road began to thin out again, and then it eventually revealed the salt flats up to their left. And so at that point, the trio pulled off on the right side of the where the vegetation was still very thick. And then the trio hopped out of the truck. They went around to the trailer, they dropped the gate, and one by one, they pulled their quad bikes off, and then each of them hopped on and drove out onto the flats. That day, the flats were actually very muddy because it had recently rained really, really heavy in that area. And so the trio spent just as much time racing each other on the flats as they did trying to drive close to each other and spray mud on each other. And so for hours, they were out there having a great time. And then, at 4:30 p.m, they decided it was time to call it a day. And and so they drove back over to the truck. They drove their quad bikes up onto the trailer, they locked it, and then they were about to get into the truck to head back home when one of them suggested, "Hey, let's head down to the water and rinse our clothes off and get all this mud off of us." Now, you need to understand, in the top end, the place you want to spend the least amount of time in is the water. People in the top end assume that in any unnatural water body that is not clearly designated as a swimming area has at least one animal lurking in it that will kill you. This is a literal precaution people in the top end take, and so this section of the Finniss River that these three friends were thinking about going and jumping into and washing off inside of, this was not a clearly designated swimming area, and so it should be avoided. But you need to remember these three guys, they grew up in the top end. They were used to living in this kind of wild area, and they'd also come to the salt flats so many times over the years, and they had jumped into the Phoenix River before to wash off and go swimming, and nothing had ever happened. And so, really, the idea that the Phoenix River could be dangerous to them, it didn't really cross their mind. They felt like, you know what, we've been there, done that, nothing's going to happen to us. And so they left the truck and walked away from the salt flats into this mangrove forest that's only a couple of feet off the road, and began walking towards this river. Normally, the trip from the road through the forest to the riverbank, basically where the forest ended and you reach the river, it would take about 10 minutes. But after walking in this mangrove for maybe a minute, they were already standing in river water. It was only a couple of inches of this water, but it's to the guys that clearly the river is very swollen from all of the recent rains, enough so that it overflowed beyond its natural boundaries and it's flooded the mangrove forest. But the three guys, they look at each other and think, "Man, what's the big deal? I'm sure we'll be fine." And so the guys continued moving on. But as the mangroves began to thin out, they began to slow down dramatically because the riverbanks on the edges of the Finniss River were very, very steep. If you were standing on dry land, if there was no flooding and you were right on the edge of the Finniss River, if you took even 1 or 2 steps into the river, you would slip down under the water and the water would be over your head. Now, as these guys are walking, because the ground is flooded with this black brackish water, they couldn't see the ground, and so they couldn't tell where the drop-off into the river was, and so they began to slow down. And then, when all the trees were practically gone, they knew they were close, and then one of them actually slipped and kind of tumbled down the edge for a second, but he turned and he grabbed one of the roots of the mangrove tree and pulled himself back up. And then the other two, after seeing this, they walked over and stood next to him. And the trio just stood there, looking out at this pitch black looking river that was very clearly moving faster than normal because of all this excess rain. But they kind of looked at each other and thought, you know what, it's not that big of a deal. You know, we'll hold on to the roots of these mangroves and lower ourselves over the embankment. We'll wash ourselves off, pull ourselves back up, no big deal. And so they each turned around and grabbed a root of one of the many mangrove trees that marked the edge of this forest, and while holding on, they would lower their lower half down, past the embankment until they were submerged. They rubbed all the mud off of themselves, being very careful not to let go of the mangrove at any point. And then, as they were about to finish up and pull themselves back up and get back to their truck, Brett loses his balance and somehow lets go of the mangrove root and slips down the steep embankment. And suddenly the current takes him away from his friends and out to the middle of this river, and before long he's getting pulled downstream. And so he yells out to Ashley and Sean, who had their backs turned to him. They turn around, they see their friend, and they instinctively leap into the river to try to go get him and help swim him back to the side. Now all three of them were very competent swimmers, and so this was not a high panic situation. This was more like an inconvenience, and maybe a little bit funny. And so that's why they left in no problem. They figured, you know, worst case scenario is we'll drift somewhere down there and we'll get out and we'll walk our way back to our car. But as soon as Sean and Ashley were free floating in this river, they felt how strong this current was, and it was way stronger than they were anticipating. And so they actually started to get a little bit worried, and they looked up ahead of them, and Brett, who had in the water for 10 or 15 seconds before they left in, he had already moved way farther downstream than them. And so they decided, you know what, we have to get out, but we need to get to Brett first. We all need to get out at the same place. And so they decide they're going to swim downstream, meet up with Brett, and then get the heck out of that river as fast as they possibly can. And so they yell out to Brett to, hey, we're coming to get you. And they start swimming as fast as they possibly can. And with the help of the current, they manage to get all the way up to Brett relatively quickly, maybe a couple of minutes. And when they reach him, Sean and Ashley go in front of Brett. And then the three of them, they stop actively swimming, and they allow the current to just kind of carry them downstream. And as they're drifting, they begin scouting the left side of the river for a solid clump of mangrove trees they can swim into, because unless there's something to grab onto on the edge of this river, they can't pull themselves out. And so at this point the trio is definitely uncomfortable being in the water because of how strong that current is, but they're confident they're going to find a viable landing spot and they're going to get out of here, and it will be a great story. And so Sean is in the front, Ashley is right behind him, and then Brett is behind Ashley, and they're all about an arm's length away from each other, and they're drifting down this river for a couple of minutes. They're looking on the left side for a viable landing spot, and then all of a sudden Ashley just yells out, hey, I see something in the water. We need to get out, find the nearest tree, get out, get out, get out. And so Sean, he starts panicking. He doesn't even turn around to see what's going on behind him. Adrenaline kicks in, and he swims as fast as he possibly can to a tree that's popped out of the river. It's literally growing in the middle of the river. And so he swims up to this tree. He manages to climb up to the first fork of the tree, which is maybe 6 or 8 feet above the water. And as soon as he's up there, he turns around and looks down, and he sees Ashley. He reaches down and he hoists Ashley up to the first fork with him. And then the pair turn around again to grab Brett, but Brett's not there. And so they look around. They're thinking, okay, did Brett not make it to the tree? Did the current pull him around? Is he at some other tree? You know, they're yelling out for him. They're looking for him, but there's no Brett. And so they're talking to each other, Ashley and Sean. They're saying, hey, did he call out? Did you hear something? Did he give some indication about where he was going? And they're saying, no, I don't know where he is. And so they start climbing up the tree a little bit and trying to look down and up the river to see if maybe they can see him. And then, all of a sudden, Sean notices something yellow flash beneath them in the water. And so he looks straight down and he sees this yellow thing down there. And so he nudges Ashley and he says, look. And so Ashley looks down. And as they're looking, they're about 10 feet off the water. At this point, they see this yellow thing start rising up to the surface. Now the water is so dark, they really can't tell what anything is unless it is at the surface. And so they're watching this yellow thing, and suddenly it comes out of the water, and they see it's Brett. He's got his yellow jacket on. That's what they saw. And Brett is in the mouth of a 13-foot-long saltwater crocodile. He is face down, and his left side is being held in this animal's mouth, and he's not moving. And so Sean and Ashley are so scared. They're just frozen. They're just staring at this monster that's in the water, that's holding their friend underwater, and they can't do anything about it. And for 2 minutes they just stand there looking at this animal, wondering what's going to happen. And for those entire 2 minutes, the crocodile stared right back up at Ashley and Sean, as if it was showing them what it was going to do to them once they got in the water. That I've done this to your friend, I'm getting you to as well. And so they're staring at this animal when suddenly it just kind of goes underneath the water back down into the black abyss, and it, along with Brett, just disappear. Ashley and Sean are so terrified that they can't even grieve for their friend. They can't feel sad for him. It's like they just go into survival mode, and without saying anything to each other, they just start climbing up this tree as fast and as far as they possibly can. And they only manage to get up maybe a couple more feet to 2 more branches One's at about 10 or 12 feet off the water, and the other is at about 15 feet off the water. And so Sean makes it onto the lower branch, and then Ashley makes it onto the slightly higher branch. And then once they're situated on their branch, and one arm is firmly wrapped around the trunk of the tree, they're able to kind of breathe for a second and take stock of their situation. And even though, of course, the elephant in the room here is that their friend was just eaten by a crocodile, but it's like they can't process that yet. Instead, they start talking about, okay, well, our families, they're going to recognise our absence, and they're going to tell the police, and the police are going to launch a search, and they're going to come find us. Both of them were confident, or they acted confident that that was going to happen, but they also knew that there was no timeline for this. It could be hours or days until this actually happened. And so, as these two teens are sitting on their branches, the reality of their situation really started to come crashing down on them, because, yeah, they're safe in this tree. But how long can they possibly stay in this tree for? I mean, eventually, they're going to need to fall asleep. And if they fall asleep, are they going to fall out of the tree and land in the water with this crocodile? I mean, they just didn't know how this was going to turn out. And so, as the two began and comforting each other, reassuring each other that no, it's going to be just fine. Someone's going to find us tonight, or tomorrow will be just fine. As they're doing that, Ashley suddenly stops talking to Sean and just looks straight down. And so Sean realises what Ashley is doing, and he matches his gaze, and he looks straight down. And at the base of their tree, in that black water, is the 13-foot-long saltwater crocodile. It's back, and it no longer has Brett in its mouth. They have no idea where Brett is. He's just gone. Saltwater crocodiles are considered the most aggressive and dangerous crocodiles in the world, and they're one of only 2 crocodile species that will actively hunt humans when given a chance. And so these 2 teens are helpless in this tree. All they have is some separation from the black water and this animal down below. And so they just find themselves staring straight down at this crocodile, and in turn, this crocodile just stares right back up at them. It's very clearly waiting for them. It wants them to come out of the tree so it can eat them. And so, the crocodile just continuously repositions itself all around the tree. It's just keeping the top of its head out of the water so its eyes can look up at them. And so, the teens are just praying that at some point it will grow tired of them and will leave. And after several hours, right as the sun is about to set, this crocodile does seem to give up on them, and it drifts under the water and disappears. After a couple of minutes, Sean, who is on the slightly lower branch, decides he doesn't want to be any closer to the water than he needs to be, and he's going to climb up to Ashley's branch. And so he very carefully stands up on his branch. He makes sure he's got solid footing, and then he reaches up and he grabs a branch with his right hand, and he kind of tests it, and he feels like it's pretty sturdy. And then he puts all his weight on it and tries to reach for another branch when this one breaks. And as soon as that branch broke, Sean tumbled 10 feet into the water. And so he hits the water, he goes all the way under, he sinks a few feet under, and immediately he's turned around and he's trying to swim as fast as he can to the surface. He possibly can to get back to this tree. And he knows the whole time he's kicking his legs, he's just attracting the attention of this crocodile. But he's got nothing else he can do. He's got no other tree he can reasonably get to that will provide safety from this animal. And so, with every ounce of energy he's got, he kicks and swims. And finally, he manages to grab a root of this tree that his friend is still inside of, and he begins pulling himself, with his lower half still submerged in the water. And so, as he's dragging himself towards the trunk of this tree, he's just waiting for this crocodile to bite down in his legs. And finally, he gets to the trunk of the tree, and he's able to pull his body out of the water, and he clambers up to that original branch he was on. And then he and Ashley work to get him up to Ashley's branch. And as soon as he sits down next to Ashley and he's secure, they both look down and just a little ways away from the tree, basically in the area where Sean had just landed in the water, they see with the little light that is left, this crocodile swimming right back over to the tree, and it camps out right underneath. Sean had gotten out just in time, When the sun finally did set about 10 or 15 minutes later, it became pitch black. There's no ambient light in this part of the world. There aren't any buildings or cities close enough to this area, and so it is truly pitch black. And so they could no longer see the crocodile down below, but they knew it was there because periodically they would hear it repositioning itself right underneath them. Also, because it was so dark, the two teens could not actually see each other, and so they began holding on to each other. And then, any time either of them moved, they would announce their movement to the other, just so they knew they had not fallen asleep and were not falling out of the tree to a horrible death. And so a few hours went by like this, where it was silence with the exception of the sounds of this crocodile repositioning itself periodically. A little after midnight, a huge storm rolled into this area, and it began absolutely downpouring, and the raindrops that were hitting the river were so loud that the teens could no longer hear the sound of this crocodile, and so they had no idea if it was still down below them or not. But every time lightning would strike, it would illuminate the sky for that flash of a second, and in that flash, they would look down and there would be the crocodile. After several hours of this super intense downpour, the two teens also started to become concerned that all this additional rain could raise the water level of the river all the way up, high enough that this crocodile might be able to jump out and reach their legs. But because it was so dark, they couldn't actually see the top of the water, and so they had no way of knowing if the water levels were actually rising or not. And so they both kind of sucked their legs up onto this branch and tried to make themselves as small as they could, while still remaining anchored to each other and also to the branch. And that's how they sat for the next several hours, just hoping they would survive the night. Finally, when the sun came up that following morning, the teens immediately noticed that the crocodile was still right below them, just lurking at the base of the tree waiting for them, and they also noticed the water level of the river had clearly come up quite a bit, and so if they weren't rescued soon, there was a good chance that another heavy rainstorm, that crocodile, would be in range of them, and there was nowhere they could go. They were as high up as they could get, not to mention the fact they were hypothermic. They were weak, they were tired, and if you fall asleep, you're going to fall in the water. And so to mention the fact they were hypothermic, they were weak, they were tired, and if you fall asleep, you're going to fall in the water. And so the two and then had been walking down the river, yelling out to them. And then they finally did find them. Initially, when they located these two teens stuck in the tree, they called in a helicopter to hover over them and lower down a ladder that could climb back up. But when the helicopter got close to this tree, the rotor, washed from the spinning blades, it practically blew the boys out of the tree, and this crocodile was still in the water. The rescuers could see it. The boys could still see it. And so there was this fear that the helicopter would literally send them into the water to their death. And so they had to abandon the helicopter approach. However, the blades of that helicopter did ultimately scare this crocodile, and the crocodile swam away. And so, as soon as the helicopter was off station, they had a boat come in, and the boat got right underneath the two boys. They jumped down into it, and they were brought to safety. The two boys were brought to a hospital where doctors determined that they were physically okay, but both of them were severely traumatized from what they had just been through. As for Brett, despite an exhaustive search of that river, they never found his body or any of his clothing or any belongings he had on him, and they never found the crocodile that killed him. So, that's going to do it.
What city is the emergency in?
Please come to one for Blazing Star. I think my wife's dead. We had people breaking into our house,
Sir.
and now someone killed her.
Sir, tell me the city you need to talk to.
Swansville, Ohio.
Okay, you need to be transferred. Don't hang up.
upsetting. But before we get into today's story, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's story. Strongsville, Ohio used to be just another typical quiet American suburb. Nice homes, nice families, nice restaurants, and a mall. But in late 2017, a discovery was made in Strongsville that put this town on the map in the worst way possible. To understand this discovery, we need to go back to early 2016 when this town's nightmare began. In early 2016, two long-time Strongsville residents, Bruce and Melinda Bleskovich, received some very exciting news. Their 20-year-old daughter, named Anna, and her 20-year-old fiancé, named Jeff, had just told them they were expecting a baby girl. And so Bruce and Melinda were totally excited about the prospect of finally becoming grandparents. But at the same time, they knew Anna and Jeff did not have very much money. Anna still lived at home with Bruce and Melinda. She did have a job, but she made very little money. She was a waitress at a local Applebee's restaurant. And as for Jeff, he had a better job working as a service technician for a heating and air company, but he didn't have enough money to support him and Anna. In fact, he didn't even have enough money to move out of his parents' home. He was still living with them on the other side of Strongsville, and so this couple, they're really excited about their baby. But Bruce and Melinda are thinking, we really got to find a way to support them, because they are just not prepared for this first child. And so Bruce and Melinda, they talked it over, and they decided the best way to support this young couple was to tell their daughter, if she wanted to, she could invite Jeff to come stay at their house. That way, the two of them could be together, and once they had their daughter, Bruce and Melinda could be the great-grandparents and help take care of the baby. And in general, this would allow the couple to just continue to save money and move out when they were ready. And so when they told Anna they were willing to do this, Anna was so happy. She was so grateful. She called Jeff, and Jeff was equally happy and grateful and said, "Yes, I would love to move in with you guys." So it took several months, but finally in June of 2016, which was the same month that Jeff and Anna welcomed their daughter to the world, Jeff would leave his parents' home and move into Bruce and Melinda's home. And almost immediately after he moved in, he and the rest of Anna's family began experiencing some very strange and disturbing things around their property. Just a few days after Jeff had moved in, he and Anna were home alone. They were on the main floor of the house, and they were having dinner at the kitchen table. And at some point, Jeff just happened to glance out one of the back windows that looked out into their backyard. And now this property had this huge falling backyard. Basically, they had all these houses kind of in a row, and they all had almost like a communal backyard, this big open space. And so Jeff is looking out into this huge backyard, and he sees off in the distance something strange. He doesn't really know what he's looking at because it's night time, it's dark. But he stands up and he walks over to the window, and as he's looking out, he sees way off on the backside of their property are these four strangers just standing there, appearing to be smoking something, and they're just kind of looking up at the Bleskovich house. And so Jeff is looking out the window at these four, not really sure what to make of them, and he calls Anna over. And so Anna walks over, and the two of them are looking out, not really sure what to do. I mean, on the one hand, these four people who they clearly didn't know, or they believed they didn't know, were definitely trespassing, but at the same time they weren't really doing anything. They were just kind of standing there smoking. But as they're watching these four people, one of them begins walking up the property towards their home, and then stops alongside the Bleskovich trampoline, which was in their backyard. And this person begins fiddling with time the squad car arrived in front of the Pleskovich house, the 4 people in back must have seen the car, and they took off running. And so when the police officer went in the backyard and looked around, there was no one there, and there was also no sign they were there. There was no drop cigarette butts or anything. They just kind of vanished. And so the police officer told Jeff and Anna, if they come back, let us know. And so the officer left. And then a little while later, when Bruce and Melinda came home, Jeff and Anna would tell them about what happened. And they would agree that that was totally strange. That in all the decades they had lived in Strongsville, they had never had anybody stroll onto their property and just loiter in the middle of the night. And so, for the next couple of days, the family was definitely on edge. But after a little while, this whole incident was largely forgotten about. Fast forward about 5 months to November 2016, and Anna was home alone with her young daughter, and she's playing with her daughter on the first floor of the house towards the front of the house. And as she's playing with her daughter, she suddenly hears what sounds like someone trying to open the back sliding glass door on the back of the house. And so instinctively Anna thinks, okay, Jeff must be out there, or my parents must be out there, and they don't have a key or something. And so she scoops up her daughter, and she begins walking towards the back of the house to open the store for them. And when she walks into one of the back rooms, before she reaches the back door, she happens to look out one of the windows that looked out into the backyard. And standing right up against the glass is this unknown male figure with his face pressed up against the glass. And so Anna just freezes and stares at this guy. And then this guy, he notices Anna and he ducks down out of view. And now Anna's thinking to herself, this is the guy he must have been trying to break in my back door. I'm home alone. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if he's going to try to break in again. And so she just turns and runs back towards the front of the house. She runs upstairs. She goes in her bedroom. She locks the door and she calls the police. But by the time the police come out there and they look around, they can't find this unknown figure that was at the back of the house. And there's no sign of an attempted forced entry. And so, unfortunately, they told her, look, I'm sure this was very traumatic for you, but there's really nothing we can do here. There's no evidence to suggest who did this. And so, please, just, keep your house locked. And if you see anybody suspicious on your property, call us back. And so naturally, after the police left and Anna had a chance to contact Jeff and her parents, they were horrified and they rushed home to comfort her. And then, after the initial shock of this incident had worn off, the family began to speculate. Do you think this might be connected to those 4 strangers we saw on our property a few months ago? It just seems odd that those 2 things would happen so close together. And then the family began to think, okay, well then who is this person? Who are these people? What do they want? Why are they targeting us? What's going on? Because as it was, the Pleskovic family, they didn't have any enemies, at least none that they knew of. If anything, the people of Strongsville adored this family, especially Melinda, the mother. For the past 20 plus years, she had been a middle school teacher in town, and her students adored her. She was also a big-time soccer coach in the community because she had played in college, and she was still very passionate about it. So, she was this amazing coach, and in the eyes of many parents in the Strongsville community, Melinda was a bit of an inspiration, because she was not only the mother to Anna, she was also the mother of an 18-year-old boy named Kyle, who had Down syndrome and was non-verbal. And Melinda just had this unbelievable way with him, where she was so good to him. She incorporated him in everything. She got him so involved. She gave him the best life he could possibly have. And so, Anytime you saw Kyle with his mother, Kyle would be all smiles. Even though Kyle couldn't speak, it was so obvious his mother made him incredibly happy. But regardless of the reason for these strangers to be lurking around their property, the Bleskovich family was now totally on edge and found themselves constantly looking out the windows, especially at night, in fear these strangers were going to come back and might try to break in again. And unfortunately, these strangers would come back in January of 2017. So, 2 months after Anna saw that unknown figure at the window and heard the back door sliding around, Bruce's car was broken into. It was sitting in the driveway of their property. Someone got inside of it and stole his laptop. And so, Bruce, he calls the police and he says, "You know, I've got to believe this has to do with the people that are harassing my family." And the police believed him, and they began looking around and asking around, but they could never track down the laptop or the thief. And so once again, the family was kind of left on their own, and the police said, "Look, you know, if you see anything else, let us know. But there's not much we can do here." A few months later, in July of that year, Anna, Jeff and their daughter were all home together one night when Anna happened to look out one of the back windows on their first floor. And out on the very back of the property were 3 strangers just standing in that same spot where they saw those 4 strangers smoking the year before. And these 3 strangers are just standing there looking up at the house. And so, horrified, Anna calls out to Jeff and says, "Look, there are 3 people in the back of our property." And so Anna, she pulls out her phone and she's calling the police. And as she's calling the police, Jeff, who's totally upset that there are these people harassing him and his family and making them feel unsafe, he just grabs a flashlight and storms out the back door to go confront these people. But as soon as Jeff went out the back door, before he could even shine the light on them, the 3 people had turned and ran and vanished. And so finally, when the police did show up, they were aware of all the calls they had gotten from this family. And so they went out there and they did a serious search for these 3 strangers. But like always, nothing was found. And so the family, once again, was told, "If you see anything else, let us know." The following month, which was August, Anna was home with her daughter, along with her mother, who was upstairs. And as Anna is in the front of the house in the playroom with her daughter, she hears the sound of somebody trying to open that backsliding door. And now, immediately, her radar is up because she knows what happened. The last time she heard the sound, there was that person in the window, but she's thinking, "Okay, I can't just immediately call the police. I need to at least look and see if there's someone that I know at the back door." And so she scoops her daughter up. She stands up and she walks around to the edge of the room she's in. She kind of peeks her head down this hallway that will give her a clear view of this backsliding glass door. And once she finally has a full view of whoever is there, she screams because there are 2 large adults, as she would say, standing at the back door trying to force open the door. And so when she screams, these 2 strangers, they hear it. They turn around and they run. And Melinda, she was upstairs. She hears her daughter screaming. She comes flying downstairs. She's trying to figure out what's going on. Anna is hysterical. The baby's crying. And so Melinda actually calls the police about what her daughter has just seen. The police come out. They search the property. They can't find anyone. And so, again, the police leave and they tell the family, "Look, you know, I'm sorry this is happening to you, but we can't do anything. So please just let us know if anything else happens, and we'll be out here as soon as we can. You know, we're bound to catch these people. But, you know, right now, we just don't have much to operate on." The following month, which was September, one of Melinda's car keys would go missing. And whoever had these keys, whoever had stolen these keys, would use it to randomly start Melinda's car in the middle of the night. And they also used it to set off her car alarm at odd hours of the night. And then, also during this time frame that her keys were missing, they also discovered that there were nails jammed into the tyres of Bruce's car. And so, of course, the family calls the police and tells them about what's going on, but the police can't do anything. And so, very frustrated, Melinda actually takes to Facebook and posts that someone's stolen her keys, and please, just give them back. And just overall, she's pleading with whoever is harassing her family to just leave them alone. But unfortunately, this post would not do anything. The harassment would continue. A month later, on October 19th, Jeff was home alone when he heard the sound of the backsliding glass door rattling. And now he knows that every time this has been heard by Anna, that there's always some stranger at the back door. And so Jeff grabs the family dog and he very carefully turns and looks down that hallway towards the back door to see who this is. And right as he pokes his head out, he sees there's this large adult figure with a hood up trying to open this back door. And so the dog sees this person and starts barking and running towards the door. Jeff runs after the dog, and this big person outside is trying to break in. He sees the dog, he sees Jeff running, and he turns and he runs away. And so Jeff and the dog, they stay inside the house and they watch this guy just take off across the property and disappear into the trees. And Jeff would call the police. But like always, the police came out and there just was nothing they could do. 4 days later, on October 23rd, Jeff, along with his young daughter and Bruce, they went to the local Applebee's where Anna worked to have dinner there and have Anna wait on them. And then, after they were done eating, they said their goodbyes to Anna. They left the restaurant, they hopped in their cars and they drove back to their house. When they got there, Bruce was the first up the steps and he got to the front door and it was locked, and so he knocked, and Kyle, his son, he came and unlocked the door. Bruce went inside, followed closely behind by Jeff, who was holding his daughter. They get inside and Bruce walks through the house to the back of the house where the kitchen is. He flips on the light and there's something on the kitchen floor. And when Jeff sees it, he immediately turns around and runs out of the house, carrying his daughter. He grabs Kyle along the way and just takes them straight out of the house. And then, once Jeff was outside, he called 911. And when you listen to his 911 call, it sounds like Jeff is unable to process what he has just seen.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
Somebody's been attacked in my house.
Somebody's been what?
Attacked.
They attacked who? Who was attacked?
Mel Pleskovic. Mel Pleskovic was attacked.
He was attacked by whom? Do you know?
She was. No, we just came home. She's on the kitchen floor.
Jeff and Bruce had just discovered Melinda lying on the kitchen floor. She'd been stabbed over 35 times and shot 3 times. She would be rushed to the hospital, but she would die that night. Although the family was in shock and couldn't even begin to process what had just happened, they were all acutely aware that whoever had done this to Melinda had to be connected to all of these strange and suspicious people that have been lurking around their property for the better part of 2 years. In fact, literally after Jeff had called 911, Bruce was inside in the kitchen kneeling next to his dying wife, and he called 911 and he would tell the dispatcher that the Strongsville Police Department really dropped the ball.
911, what city is the emergency in?
Please come to 1 Blazing Star. I think my wife's dead. Someone. We've had people breaking into our fucking house.
Sir.
And now someone killed her.
Sir, tell me the city you need to talk to.
Strongsville, Ohio.
Okay, you need to be transferred. Don't hang up.
911, what's the city of your emergency?
Strongsville, Ohio. We have people on the way already.
What's the address?
4 Blazing Star. I think someone killed my wife.
You think someone killed your wife?
Yeah, it looks like she has stab wounds on her back. We've had people trying to break into our house all year, stealing.
Sir, I need to ask you questions, okay? Are you there right now?
I just got in the door with my new son-in-law. My son Kyle was here
Okay,
with her.
sir, what I want you to do is walk outside.
The Strongsville Police Department would come out in force for this case, and they would solve it in just 4 days. And when they went public with who killed Melinda, no one could believe it. Back on October 23rd. So, this was the night Melinda was discovered. Jeff, along with his young daughter, and Melinda and her son Kyle, they were all together in the house. And at some point, Jeff had put his daughter down in her playpen and then went into the kitchen where Melinda was, and he walked up to her, pulled out a knife, and stabbed her over 35 times. And then, when Melinda fell to the ground, Jeff drew a gun and shot her 3 additional times to make sure she was dead. Now, while he was doing this, his daughter is literally just a few feet away. And Kyle presumably is also right nearby, but he has no way of understanding what's happening to his mother. And so, with these 2 totally innocent lives just right nearby, Jeff would clean off his weapons and he'd take off his bloody clothes and he would hide them inside of his car. And then he would just scoop up his daughter and he would leave the house, leaving Kyle alone in the house with his dying mother in the kitchen. Just leaves him there, shuts the door, locks it, and then Jeff and his daughter would drive to Applebee's to have dinner with Melinda's husband and her daughter. And then, after several hours, when they got back to the property, Jeff knew what was waiting for them inside, and he still allowed Bruce to go inside first and discover his dying wife on the kitchen floor. Very little is known about why Jeff did this, because Jeff has actually never come out and given his motive for the crime. The running theory is that Jeff actually was not going to be able to pay for the wedding, which was coming up in a couple of days, and the wedding venue had actually contacted Melinda and said, hey, you know, we're cancelling the wedding because your future son-in-law can't pay for it. And so, Melinda apparently confronted Jeff about his financial troubles, and the theory is he snapped and killed her. However, that can't possibly be the entire story for why he did this, because it would turn out Jeff was found to be responsible for literally every single suspicious event that had taken place around the Plaskovich property leading up to the attack, meaning every time they had seen strangers lurking around their property or people trying to break into their house, that had been because of Jeff. Either it was literally Jeff outside being one of these suspicious people, or he had asked friends, or hired someone, or groups of people to pretend to be suspicious people on the property, or Jeff had been the only person to see these suspicious people, and then miraculously, when other people attempted to look outside, you know, they were gone, and so obviously Jeff was lying. What is kind of generally accepted as why Jeff did this, according to the people in Strongsville, is that Jeff apparently loathed Melinda. Even though she had opened her house to him, he loathed her. And as soon as he moved in 2016, he began plotting to kill her. And so all of these suspicious events were Jeff's attempt at building this really intricate alibi that they had these strangers out there that were targeting this family. And so that when she would ultimately be killed by him, it would look like these strangers had done it. And at first it totally worked. Everybody believed it. The police, the family, friends, that strangers had broken into the house and killed Melinda. In fact, there was so little suspicion on Jeff after her murder that Jeff actually served as a pallbearer in Melinda's funeral. But ultimately, the police would discover the knife and some bloody clothes in the back of Jeff's car, and so they would arrest him, and they would present this mountain of evidence against him, and Jeff would confess to killing Melinda. However, he wouldn't give any additional information about the crime. He would just basically say, yes, I did kill her. He would also never give an apology or explanation to the family. he would ultimately be sentenced to life in prison with the opportunity for parole after 33 years. During Jeff's trial, there was this totally heartbreaking moment when Bruce, Melinda's husband, spoke, and he would say their son. Kyle does not understand that his mother is gone, and so now every time they go out to eat, which is something Kyle really likes to do, and he used to love doing with his mother, he'll just sit and stare out the window, eagerly expecting his mother to show up any minute.